There was a poor widow, whose cottage stood in a country village, a long distance from London, for many years. The widow had one child, Jack, and pampered him by giving him everything he wanted. Because of this, Jack ignored her advice and became careless and wasteful. His foolishness arose from his mother's never having chided him, rather than him being bad. As she was not wealthy, and he would not work, she was obliged to support herself and him by selling everything she had. At last nothing remained but a cow. The widow, with tears in her eyes, could not help but scold Jack. "Oh, you wicked boy," said she. "By your reckless course of life you have now brought us both to fall. Careless, careless boy. I have no money to buy a bit of bread for another day. Nothing remains but my poor cow, and that must be sold, or we will starve." Jack felt guilty for a few minutes, but soon it was over, and then becoming very hungry, he teased his poor mother to let him sell the cow, to which at last she reluctantly consented. As he proceeded on his journey, he met a butcher, who inquired where he was going with the cow. Jack replied he was going to sell it. The butcher had some wonderful beans of different colors in his bag. Jack focused on them in awe. The butcher noticed this and, knowing Jack was impulsive, decided to take advantage of him. He offered all the beans in exchange for the cow. The foolish boy thought it a great offer. The bargain was struck, and the cow exchanged for a few paltry beans. When Jack hurried home with the beans and told his mother, after showing them to her, she kicked the beans away in a great passion. They flew in all directions and landed as far as the garden. Early in the morning, Jack arose from his bed, and seeing something strange from the window, he hastened downstairs into the garden. He discovered that some of the beans had taken root and grown into something extraordinary. The stalks grew very thick and intertwined, forming a ladder-like chain. Looking upwards, he could not see the top. It seemed to disappear in the clouds. He tried it, discovered it firm, and not to at all shaky. A new idea immediately struck him. He would climb the beanstalk and see to where it led. His excitement for his plan made him forget about his hunger. Jack quickly communicated his intention to his mother. Then he set out, and after climbing for several hours, he reached the top of the beanstalk. Fatigued and almost completely exhausted, looking around, he was surprised to find himself in a strange country. It looked to be quite a barren desert. Not a tree, shrub, house, or living creature was to be seen. Jack sat himself, pondering a block of stone, and thought of his mother. His hunger attacked him, and now he appeared sorrowful for his disobedience in climbing the beanstalk against her will. He concluded that he must now die for want of food. However, he walked on, hoping to see a house where he might beg something to eat. Suddenly, he observed a beautiful young female at some distance. She was dressed in an elegant manner, and had a small white wand in her hand, on the top of which was a peacock of pure gold. She approached and said, "I will reveal to you a story your mother dare not. But before I begin, I require a solemn promise on your part to do what I command. I am a fairy, and unless you perform exactly what I direct you to do, you will deprive me of the power to assist you. And there is little doubt but that you will die in the attempt." Jack was rather frightened at this caution, but promised to follow her directions. Your father was a rich man, generous and caring. He made it a habit to help those in need in his neighborhood. He sought out people who were helpless or distressed to offer them assistance. A few miles from your father's house lived a huge giant. He was the dread of the country, only giving cruelty and oppression. This creature was deeply envious and hated hearing others praise for their goodness. Out of spite, he vowed to harm him to stop people from talking about his good deeds. Your father was too good a man to fear evil from others. Consequently, it was not long before the cruel giant found an opportunity to put his wicked threats into practice. When he learned that your parents were planning to spend a few days with a friend far from home, he arranged for your father to be ambushed and killed. As for your mother, she was captured on their journey back. At the time this happened, you were but a few months old. Your poor mother, nearly dead from horror, was taken away by the cruel giant's emissaries to a dungeon under his house. She and her poor babe were both long confined as prisoners. Worried by your parents' absence, the servants went searching for them. but no news of either could be found. In the meantime, he had a fake will created. He claimed that your father had left all his property to him as your guardian. He openly took possession of everything. Several months later, the giant offered to restore her freedom, but she had to solemnly swear that she would never divulge the story of what happened to her and her family. To ensure she couldn't harm him if she broke her oath, the giant had her sent away on a ship to a distant country. There, she was left with no money except what she could get from selling a few valuables she had hidden in her clothing. I was appointed your father's guardian at his birth, but fairies have laws to which they are subject the same as mortals. A short time before the giant assassinated your father, I transgressed. My punishment was a suspension of my power for a limited time, an unfortunate circumstance as it entirely prevented my assisting your father, even when I most wished to do so. The day on which you met the butcher, as you went to sell your mother's cow, my power was restored. It was I who secretly prompted you to take the beans in exchange for the cow. By my power, the beanstalk grew to so great a height and formed a ladder. The giant lives in this country. You are the person appointed to punish him for all his wickedness. You will face dangers and difficulties, but you must stay determined to avenge your father's death, or you will not succeed in anything you do. As to the giant's possessions, everything he has is yours, though you are deprived of it. You may take, therefore, what part of it you can. You must be careful because his love for gold is so great that if he notices even the smallest loss, he will become furious and extremely vigilant going forward. But you must still pursue him, for it is only by strategy that you can ever hope to overcome him to regain your rightful property. But he must also pay for your father's murder. One thing I desire is, do not let your mother know you are acquainted with your father's history till you see me again. Go along the direct road. You will soon see the house where your cruel enemy lives. While you do as I order you, I will protect and guard you. But remember, if you disobey my commands, a dreadful punishment awaits you." As soon as she had concluded, she disappeared, leaving Jack to follow his journey. He walked on till after sunset, when, to his great joy, he saw a large mansion. This pleasant sight revived his drooping spirits. He redoubled his speed and reached it very soon. A well-looking woman stood at the door. He accosted her, begging she would give him a morsel of bread and a night's lodging. She expressed the greatest surprise at seeing him, and said it was quite uncommon to see any strange creature near their house. It was mostly known that her husband was a very cruel and powerful giant, one that would eat human flesh if he could possibly get it. This account terrified Jack greatly. Still, not forgetting the fairy's protection, he hoped to elude the giant. He begged the woman to take him in for one night only and hide him where she thought proper. The good woman at last suffered herself to be persuaded, for her disposition was remarkably compassionate, and she at last led him into the house. First they passed an elegant hall, finely furnished. Then they proceeded through several spacious rooms, all in the same style of grandeur. They looked to be quite forsaken and desolate. Next, there was a long, dark corridor, just wide enough to reveal iron bars on either side, separating a grim dungeon. From within, the groans of several poor victims echoed. Prisoners the cruel giant kept locked away to satisfy his hunger. Poor Jack was in a dreadful fright at witnessing such a horrible scene. This caused him to fear that he would never see his mother again, and instead wind up a prisoner himself. He feared being eaten by the giant. Still, he recalled the fairy, and a gleam of hope forced itself into his heart. The good woman then took Jack to a spacious kitchen, where a great fire was kept. She bade him sit down and gave him plenty to eat and drink. In the meantime, he had done his meal and enjoyed himself, but was disturbed by a hard knocking at the gate, so loud as to cause the house to shake. Jack was concealed in the oven, and the giant's wife ran to let in her husband. Jack heard him accost her in a voice like thunder, saying, "Wife, wife, I smell fresh meat." "Oh, my dear," replied she, "it is nothing but the people in the dungeon." The giant seemed to believe her, and at last seated himself by the fireside while the wife prepared supper. Barely Jack tried to look at the monster through a small crack. He was shocked by how much he ate and drank, and he thought he would never stop. After his supper, A very curious hen was brought and placed on the table before him. Jack's curiosity was so great to see what would happen. He observed that it stood quiet before him, and every time the giant said, "Lay," the hen laid an egg of solid gold. The giant amused himself a long time with his hen. Meanwhile, his wife went to bed. At length he fell asleep and snored like the roaring of a cannon. Jack, finding him still asleep at daybreak, crept softly from his hiding place, seized the hen, and ran off with her as fast as his legs could possibly allow him. Jack easily retraced his way to the beanstalk and descended it better and quicker than he expected. His mother was overwhelmed to see him. "Now, mother," said Jack, "I have brought you home that which will make you rich." The hen produced as many golden eggs as they desired. They sold them and soon became possessed of as many riches as they wanted. For a few months, Jack and his mother lived very happily, but he longed to pay the giant another visit. Early in the morning he again climbed the beanstalk and reached the giant's mansion late in the evening. The woman was at the door as before. Jack told her a pitiful tale and prayed for a night's shelter. She told him that she had admitted a poor hungry boy once before, and the little ingrate had stolen one of the giant's treasures. Ever since that, she has been cruelly treated. She, however, led him to the kitchen, gave him a supper, and put him in a lumber closet. Soon after, the giant came in, took his supper, and ordered his wife to bring down his bags of gold and silver. Jack peeped out of his hiding place and observed the giant counting over his treasures, after which he carefully put them in bags again, fell asleep, and snored as before. Jack crept quietly from his hiding place and approached the giant when a little dog under the chair barked furiously. Contrary to his expectation, the giant slept on soundly and the dog ceased. Jack seized the bags, reached the door in safety, and soon arrived at the bottom of the beanstalk. When he reached his mother's cottage, he found it quite deserted. Greatly surprised, he ran into the village, and an old woman directed him to a house, where he found his mother apparently dying. On being informed of our hero's safe return, his mother revived and soon recovered. Jack then presented 2 bags of gold and silver to her. She could see that something was bothering him and wanted to know what it was. But Jack knew too well what the consequence would be should he discover the cause of his melancholy to her. He did his best to resist the overwhelming urge to climb the beanstalk again. On the longest day, Jack arose as soon as it was light, ascended the beanstalk, and reached the top with some little trouble. He found the road and traveled it the same as the other times. He arrived at the giant's house in the evening and found his wife standing as usual at the door. Jack now appeared a different character and had disguised himself so completely that she did not appear to have any recollection of him. However, when he begged admittance, he found it very difficult to persuade her. At last he prevailed and was allowed entry and was concealed in a copper. When the giant returned, he said, as usual, Wife, I smell fresh meat." But Jack felt quite composed, as he had said so before, and had soon been satisfied. However, the giant suddenly jumped up and, despite his wife's protests, searched the entire room. Whilst this was going on, Jack was terrified and ready to die with fear. He wished himself at home 1,000 times, but when the giant approached the copper and put his hand upon the lid, Jack thought his death was certain. Fortunately, the giant ended his search there without moving the lid and seated himself quietly by the fireside. When the giant's supper was over, he commanded his wife to fetch down his harp. Jack peeped under the copper lid and soon saw the most beautiful one that could be imagined. It was put by the giant on the table, who said, "Play," and it instantly played of its own accord. The music was uncommonly fine. Jack was delighted and felt more anxious to get the harp into his possession than either of the former treasures. The giant's soul was not attuned to harmony, and the music soon lulled him into a sound sleep. Now was the time to carry off the harp, as the giant appeared to be in a more profound sleep than usual. Jack soon made up his mind, got out of the copper, and seized the harp, which, however, being enchanted by a fairy, called out loudly, "Master, master." The giant awoke, stood up, and tried to pursue Jack, but he had drunk so much that he could not stand. Jack ran as quick as he could. In a little time, The giant recovered sufficiently to walk slowly, or rather to reel after him. Had he been sober, he would have caught Jack instantly, but as he then was, Jack desired to be first at the top of the beanstalk. The giant called to him all the way along the road in a voice like thunder, and was sometimes very near to him. The moment Jack got down the beanstalk, he called out for a hatchet. One was brought to him directly. Just at that instant, the giant began to descend. But Jack, with his hatchet, cut the beanstalk close off at the root. The giant fell headlong into the garden, so hard it seemed to shake the ground. The fall instantly killed him. Jack sincerely apologized to his mother for all the pain he had caused her and promised to be loving and obedient to her from now on. He kept his promise and became a model of love and care toward his mother from that day on.